So, we do these live shows from time to time, and it was requested that we do this show, and I thought, we haven't done one probably in about a year, right? I think we did one at the end of last year, Mav.
I think we do about one a year or something. They present us with a different set of sort of interesting difficulties compared to making the normal trash talk, since we tend to make these live ones just ad hoc on the fly. So, we'll just record it and what do you reckon? Try not to swear too much. And
I figured
anyone who's met me knows that there's no one more Australian among us than I am.
Yeah, we just kind of play it off the cuff. So I see we have some potentially some new people here that I haven't talked to before, and some people who haven't been on the show before. So anybody want to introduce themselves? Anybody want to step out there and expose themselves?
It's
Sure.
video.
I don't want anyone to expose them.
Well, yeah, no exposing, no exposing.
Sure, I will. This is John Pointer, if you guys can hear me.
Hi, John.
Hey, John.
Hey.
Hello.
Ed, sorry, I would show myself, but for some reason it's not showing. I'll see if I can get that working. But yeah, I've been listening to your guys' podcasts for the past 6 months or so, and been going back and listening to all the original ones. I'm up through 12 now, enjoying it greatly. Fort Collins, Colorado in the US, and just a tiny bit. I, like lots of people, end of grade school, junior high, was first computer I was exposed to was a TRS-80 Model 1 in my school. Few units they had in a small class. And then just a couple of years ago, found one on eBay and bought it, and just been getting into just messing with it. Programmed a little Pong game just to have the fun of figuring out the logic and doing some old school basic programming. And so enjoying it and enjoying listening to the podcast. And very jealous that I wasn't able to come to Tandy Assembly this year, but hopeful for next year. And thank you guys for all you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we should have some news later about Tandy Assembly, shouldn't we, Pete?
Yeah, we actually have a date set, and we actually have the president of Tandy Assembly with us, Mike Rowan. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about Tandy Assembly later with Mike.
Great. Well, nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, you too. Who else? Kyle, you want to introduce yourself? I'm throwing you out there.
Yeah, am I coming through okay?
Excellent.
Loud and clear.
Yep, my name is Kyle Wadston. I started in the TRS-80. My brother got one, a Model 1, back in like 79 or 80, pretty early on. And boy, I tell you, as soon as I saw it, I knew that was kind of, that was my kind of thing. I really loved it. So, 30 years later, programmer for 30 years. And, I love computers just as much today as I did 30 years ago. It's an amazing hobby.
That's a great story, because when I first saw the Model 1, I looked at it and said, you call that a computer? But I bought one anyway.
No, I thought it was just fascinating. And I still do. It's just, there's something about it. And I know that's a very common story, but, I'm one of those guys where as soon as I saw it, I knew that was for me. So recently got back into TRS-80 a little bit. I picked up a Model 4 maybe a year ago. I messed around with some emulation, but I wanted a real machine. And then, I kind of got the bug, and I bought a Model 3 and a 4P. And, as I see them, I try to pick them up. But I'll tell you, it's hard to have the space for those suckers because they're fairly large. And I'm already pretty full. So, it's tricky. I'm trying not to buy any more.
You can never have enough of. You can never have enough of them, as far as I'm concerned. So
That's going to become a real problem, Kyle. I'm telling you.
I know. Well, and you with the Model 2s, I believe I don't know how you do it.
well, he's got a basement and then an attic, and so
And a garage.
and he owns a fair bit of. His block's big, so you can put an extra shed, another one when
Wow.
you're ready.
No, I never put a Model 2 in a shed in the mice stick. I would never
No,
do
that's
that to my Model 2s.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
already seen a Model 2 that the mice have gotten to. So
Yes, we did. Yes, at Tandy Assembly.
Yeah.
So just to finish up, in the end, I built a little keyboard adapter, and maybe a little bit later we can take a look at that and talk about that for just a second.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, look forward to it. I've got one, and I've been using it since I picked it up from you at Tandy Assembly, and it hasn't missed a beat.
Oh, I love to hear
There's only
that.
a couple of keyboards that don't work with it, which makes it a really good buy, actually. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. And again, I love the show, so I appreciate what you guys have been doing, because just as a user and a fan, it's such a niche of a niche that you're really helping the community by just having your podcast, and Mav's help with all the getting those machines going. Boy, what a great thing. I just appreciate your guys' help.
Well, you're welcome. It's our pleasure. So who else we got?
Arno's just joined us. Hey, Arno.
Hey, Ian. How are you?
How you going, buddy?
hey, Arno.
What time is it there?
Well, a pretty good, decent 6 p.m. So
PM. Okay. It's 1 p.m. in the afternoon on Sunday here, so
not so bad.
we're all so far on reasonable time frames. I'm waiting for someone from the UK to drop in where it's 1 or 2 in the morning or something.
That's going to be late, yeah.
That'll be the winner right there if somebody joins from Europe. Anybody else want to introduce themselves?
Oh, I suppose I should say hi.
Hey, George.
I've
George.
been on the podcast before,
Yes.
not live. It's the first time the scheduling has worked out for me. So
I've wondered what your place looks like. I can see behind you, it looks not unlike mine. Just, books and technical resources everywhere with it looks like there's a structure to it, but, try to find one particular book you've got your mind on can take some considerable time.
I believe the computer science term is a heap.
Yeah, it's one of my bucket list items for my retirement, which is still some 20 years off, so is to actually get everything into some sort of order, so that when I'm looking for a technical manual or guide or something, I can find it within an hour. Yeah.
I don't know, George. I see a few stacks back there as well. So
Yes, there is that too.
all right.
Hey, we've got Eric there.
Yes, I am here.
Eric, how you doing? How's
Good.
Texas?
Well, it's in the low 40s right now.
Okay, not bad.
No, at least we don't have the storm that's hitting your area. So
Is the storm hitting my area?
I thought the Northeast was supposed to be hit by some big storm this weekend.
Are you serious? No, I didn't see anything.
No, it's the Midwest. I'm there, and we are getting hit. We got about
Oh.
6 inches of snow.
Oh, wow.
And he's in the basement, so how bad could it be?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
I'm actually in my office.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
See, I got all my TRS-80s in a row here with the Lisa in the middle.
Yeah. Hey, I see we've got Jimmy here. Hey, Jimmy.
Jimmy, how you
Jimmy, can
doing?
you hear us? Nope.
Oh.
Try again, Jimmy. I think that's Jimmy iPod.
You scared him off.
All right,
Yep.
so let's talk a little bit about 2018, because this is kind of a part of the show is sort of a year in review. We had maybe 7 or 8 episodes in 2018. We didn't do one a month. We're averaging about one every 6 weeks, which I think is working out for everybody involved.
I think it works out pretty well.
Yeah.
If we're doing one a month, it kind of feels like a little bit forced, or that
Right.
we've got to come up with an idea. Whereas whereas as a group of trash talk people, it gives us an idea to come up with something to talk about, and then do a little bit of research on it before just switching the cameras on. So yeah, I think we've probably this year we've probably done a better bunch of trash talks than sort of previous years. If you got some stats handy, that would be
I do
good
actually
to
stats
some
handy.
download stats. Yeah.
Yeah, so 2018 was a record year for us in our shorts term. We had more downloads. We had almost 40,000 downloads in 2018. Total downloads since the show started in 2016 is over 75,000. So
Wow.
yeah,
70,000 of those are from bots. Well, I don't believe there's 70,000 computers still out there in active service for the 500 computers out there in active service. That's a pretty good ratio.
Yeah, the average show gets about between 2,000 to 4,000 downloads. It depends on the show, I think. So you figure, do all of those downloads, are they all listeners, active listeners? Maybe not. So I have to imagine we have at least 1,000 active listeners, if not more.
500 of those are from Mav.
I do like that people are inventive in their listening habits, like that they download it and listen to it in their car in traffic instead of just swearing at the cars in front of them or something. It gives them something to get through the the long traffic queues that they can sometimes come into. Though I don't know how you'd remember last year in 2018 you got caught in a 10-hour blizzard.
Oh, please don't remind me, man. Please
don't even remind. It doesn't happen in this country. That's why I find it amusing.
Yeah, 10 hours trying to get over the George Washington Bridge. It was hell. And then we haven't had snow since, which is amazing.
Amazing.
Yep. So yeah.
So what was our most popular 2018 Trash Talk?
Let's see. Well, our most popular episode overall is the Model 4 Buyer's Guide. That has over 5,000 just in and of itself.
Yep.
In the last year, I would say it looks like the episode 24 with Ken Bruckner. If you remember that episode, we interviewed Ken. Ken was in charge of Tandy technical training for a number of years. So he ran all of those departments. He handled all of the training of the tech reps and the technicians that worked at the Radio Shack computer centers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I guess people really enjoyed that talk.
Yeah.
And
what was your favorite episode, Kyle?
Boy, I tell you, I like them all. As kind of I'm not a new user, but I'm a newer user. So I always like it when you talk about, the versions of DOS and maybe like which assemblers you're using. So I just like the tidbits here and there that I pick up from the show. It's always really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you find it from a complexity point of view? Is it hitting the mark as far as the people that it's pitched to, or it's too tech or too or not tech enough, or what do others think, like Eric or George?
I think it's at a good level. If we get, too technical, then you might lose some people. So, doing the more technical things, maybe, in a segment of it would be okay. But, the current level where it's, at is, I think, good for everyone.
Yeah. I always try to keep into my frame of mind when I'm doing the show that we have a lot of new listeners who may not even know about the TRS-80, or maybe just found this podcast on their list of recommended podcasts, for instance. So you probably noticed it, but I always try to come from the perspective of the newbie, because I know Mav can come from the perspective of the highly experienced person. So I think that's very complimentary, and it addresses a large swath of the audience.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm curious. Like, do you have listeners who've not been exposed to TRS-80 back then, and now find your podcast and become all of a sudden like
Oh,
trash talk
yeah.
enthusiast?
I mean,
I
I'm
would
one.
have thought that most people already have some exposure, like back in the days.
Right.
Like that's how I found you. You know, I mean, otherwise I would not have even bothered to download.
Well, I was saying
podcasts.
I'm one of them. I didn't have a TRS-80 back in the day. I was an Atari kid.
Oh, okay.
I only fell in love with the TRS-80 in the last 5 years, and I think part of the reason I'm so passionate about it right now is because it's all new to me. You know, there's so much to learn. You know, maybe that's part of it, but I think they're an incredible computer relative to the the machines that I played with back in the day, like the VIC-20, the Atari. Great machines, but they're more game oriented, not productivity and programmer oriented. And I'm always more of a creator than a consumer. So I find the TRS-80 to be much more focused as a productivity machine and a creation machine. And from a programmer's perspective, it's more of a real computer.
You all offer that. I think the level is just great. I enjoy, when it gets a little technical, even when it's not about a machine that I own. For some reason, I just love the conversation going through maybe it's details on the Model 2 or Model 4 or whatever. I just love the conversation. And it's interesting that almost every show, even though you'll be discussing some topic that doesn't necessarily relate to me, there'll all of a sudden be some little nugget thrown in, like Ian might mention something or someone else might mention something that is very useful to me. Like I was listening to a show one point, and I had just bought a Meteor Mission cassette game and was playing with my boys. We were loving it. Had no idea that it had sound. It said on the box that it had sound, but I thought, well, that must be for some other version of the, another model or something. And one of you guys mentioned, as just a side comment, about how programmers started using the output on the line for the cassette player, put it into a sound, into a amplifier and speakers, and they do sound with the games that way. And sure enough, go home, plug it in. Now I have sound for this game. I was amazed. I was so excited. But it was every time there seems to be some little side comment about programming or something about the machine that is a little useful nugget for me. So I listen to them all intently, even if it's not necessarily a direct topic for me. So.
Yeah, it's probably inadvertent on my part, but I do like when we sort of put enough sort of little, like you say, nuggets or tidbits in there that after you've finished watching the podcast, you sort of go back and Google or follow it up or try it on your own machines. Then we've achieved what we've set out to do.
Yeah, and the show notes are key. I really appreciate that because I'm frequently going back to those.
I was wondering if anybody ever read them, so I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, they're really handy. I like them too.
Oh, great. Good. That's really good to hear. Thanks. And just going back to what you were saying, John, there's so much to learn about the TRS-80 line of computers. The information out there is overwhelming. You can spend years, when you think of all the different magazines, the newsletters, all of the books, the software, thousands of titles. You'd never get through them all, to test them all and play with them all. So it helps to encourage the hobby and keep it as a strong hobby. I think when there's so much to learn and so much to do, you'll never master it all, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a strong hobby from that point of view, in that you can't really ever get exhausted. There's always something to collect or something to read or something to try out. And just getting back, even just trying to get the magazine collection together is once you've got an 80 micro, then there's other magazines that weren't as popular to collect, and then there's Computer News 80, which went for actually longer than 80 micro, went for something like 10 or 11 years. I was a subscriber during that time, and I've got most of the issues, but the actual ones coming up for now are very few and far between. And I noticed that the various repositories don't have good scans of them, so that's kind of like one of the side things I'm sort of moving into with this sort of thing, just when I'm sort of sick of soldering and sick of looking at a computer or something, which believe it or not, occasionally happens, then I'll scan some more of these 50-page black and white magazines and add them to the thing. But probably there's very few platforms where you can really collect. There's a TRS-80 is a platform that you can spend your life collecting and still not have everything, and that's kind of good. In depending on your personality type, it's either good because it keeps you collecting, or there's always something to find. Or if you're a person who likes to collect stuff and finish something, then it's probably a really bad choice. But
you'll never get there.
What was it, gentleman with the Tandy 600s?
Thomas McLaren.
Thomas McLaren. Yeah, he sort of said it's the best and easiest TRS-80 Tandy computer to collect, because there's only about 8 things to collect. Once you've collected them all, that's it. Your collection's complete. There's nothing else out there for the Tandy 600. So,
yeah, he's a specialist, as we say. One thing, Mav, I've never asked you before was, you're part of what you're doing for the TRS-80 community is making your living. So how does that affect your passion? Because sometimes when you bring your passion and your source of income together, you can get tired of it, or, bored of it, or not want to engage with it.
Yeah, well, what a lot of people don't know about me, a few people in Australia know, but not a lot of the people in the TRS-80 community. But what I do is, as well as the TRS-80 stuff, I also do repairs to vintage computers, flipping vintage computers of all makes and models, and as well as anything else related to old computers. So on each of those things on their own, I couldn't make a living out of it. But between them, I make enough to get by. I'm sort of lucky in that my house is paid off, so my living expenses are fairly frugal compared to what they were if I was paying for a house or something. So what happens is I tend to go through stages. So I'll work on TRS-80 stuff for a week, or to work on something new or something. And then I'll just say, I don't want to turn a TRS-80 on for another week. So I'll go and work on a 486 or a Pentium 90 or something, and get a few of those ready and for resale. Or if someone contacts me with a deceased estate of 20 computers, I'll go and pick them up and strip them out for parts or whatever. So I do get on occasion to evenings where I just don't want to see another computer. And so my solution for that lately has been watching episodes of the Orville. I don't know if any of you have watched it, but it really is a way to get away from IT, but not get into the kind of cultural problems surrounding other things like Star Trek Discovery and Doctor Who at the moment. Hey, I see Dusty's just joined us. I think we've got our latest person. Sorry, not latest person. Person up the latest to join us. So, Dusty, unmute yourself. Say something. Nope.
Just
a little bit shy.
The author of Tris 8-Bit. Come on.
Yeah. Dusty.
You can do.
We'll give him a couple more minutes.
Yeah. Just chime in whenever, Dusty.
Maybe he's waiting. Maybe he's waiting for his tea to kick in. It would be pretty late there in England at the moment. Arno, would you be able to tell us what time it is in England at the moment?
Well, so I'm in San Francisco. It's 6 p.m. It should be 2 a.m. in England, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 8 hours to London.
2 a.m. Okay. Oh, yeah. Cool.
So we got to get Dusty something for showing up, although he has to at least say at least one word. Oh man. So what should, what should we do in 2019? Just keep doing what we're doing? Any recommendations on improvements or additional things that you want to see? Anyone from the audience?
Certainly continue to keep tracking down the old Tandy Radio Shack people.
Mhm.
That's great stuff.
Yeah, that's challenging, but
it seems to be accelerating though. That's the thing. It's like early on it was hard to find, the first few of them, but now they're sort of coming along at a regular clip. When you've got people like Paul and Mike, Paul Schreiber and Mike Yetzko, they're in contact with those guys still.
As the word gets out, the audience grows, and some of them, they have their own inner circles of former Radio Shack employees, and they talk, and sometimes
Paul,
they'll reach out to me.
Paul mentioned that he's getting in touch with more and more people.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he can get some of them in touch with you.
Yeah, I know he doesn't want us to spill any of the beans on what's going to be in his new book, but
I'm hanging out for this book now. This book sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I'm sort of that's if nothing else is achieved in 2019, if this book comes out, I'll be pretty happy because I reckon that he seems to have a pretty wicked sense of humor as well. Also, I reckon it should be quite an entertaining book. I just hope that the legal side of things or anonymity doesn't put the project back too long.
And he was there, at the beginning, working with Steve Leininger on creating those first TRS-80 prototypes, and so he was there. He knows more than anyone other than Steve, maybe, about some of the details of those early days. So I hope he puts a lot of that in the book.
Yeah. So why don't we go around the table and each talk about what we're going to be working on or what we're working on this year?
Sure. So I'll start. So I kind of mentioned this on the social media circles and in various places that I'm working on this project called TRS-80, which is a TRS-80 network interface card. It's not a product really. It's more of a project at this point, but it can be a product. It's sort of it's forming, and I'm working with Arno Kuder, actually, who's on the call, and Arno can talk a little bit about this as well. But TRS-80 is essentially, it's going to be software that's running on this hardware platform that Arno created for the RetroStore card that we talked about on the show before. And if you know my history in the TRS-80 community over the past few years, I like to develop software, and I like to develop software that uses networking, goes out to the internet. The applications like TRSWiki and TRSBox and TRSPIC. At first, I was using the Ethernet connectivity on the Mize and the M3SE that I have, and they're fantastic products. But they have a premium price. So a majority of TRS-80 aficionados cannot afford them and don't have them. They're sort of the premium product that you can have, and they make your life great. But if you develop software that only runs with those accessories, you're going to have a pretty small audience. So then I started developing connectivity through the serial port using serial IP adapters. And that works okay, but of course you have limitations of the speed of the serial port. And with the Model 1, 3, and 4, I can get up to 19.2, kilobaud, which is pretty good. And it pretty much satisfies a lot of your needs, except for large file transfers, or if you want to, say, view images in almost real time. It's slow. It's still slow. And then on the Model 2 line of computers, they have a max baud speed of only 9,600 baud. So that solution's even slower there. And there's no Mize or M3SE for the Model 2. So really, I'm a big Model 2 fan. Everybody knows that, and I'm really looking to adapt this to the Model 2 line as well. I'm starting off on the Model 134. One reason is that because of the hardware that Arno developed, is only currently running on the Model 3 and 4, but that's going to change soon. Arno, you want to talk a little bit about what we've been discussing?
Yeah, I had to laugh a little bit when you said it's going to change soon. I'm not happy.
Soon is relative.
Relatively speaking, yeah. Yeah, well, I guess most of you have seen the presentation that I gave at Tensor Assembly a couple of months ago, and the hardware I built is basically a custom, or at least the software that's running on the card is currently a custom protocol that allows the TRS-80 access to the retro store. So the idea is what I've been working on for some time, to give the same seamless experience on browsing and downloading from an app store, just basically for retro apps. So if you go to retrostore.org, you can see what we've hosted there so far, and there's also a tie into the Android emulator. Oops.
Not just me. I'm just bringing up the
website. Yeah. Now, when I came to present that, Pete immediately pointed out that what I have is not just something that can connect to the retro store, but it's a generic interface with the internet. And he's, of course, certainly right. So what you can see Pete sharing right now, so the retro store card is little card that is designed. The key part is an ESP-based microcontroller. You can see a bit of a blow up down on the bottom of that screen. And this little guy has Wi-Fi, so it can connect to your local router. And the custom protocol that I implemented basically then does all the HTTP back to the RetroStore backend. And what Pete has done is basically add another custom protocol, except that he's did that for low-level TCP sockets, Berkeley sockets, so that from within the TRS-80 can open a socket. Pete, why don't you show that little basic program that you sent to me? I thought it was quite mind-blowing when I first saw that.
Yeah, let me bring that up here. Hold on one second. Okay, so this is...
So while... okay, wow, you did even more now, so that's... okay.
So this is an example of connecting to the NIST time service over TCP/IP sockets, and this is basically a public time server that essentially says what is the current time from this what is it, National Institutes I forget what it is.
Standards Institute.
Standards, yeah. So you can see, if you're familiar with programming at all and how sockets work, you open a socket, you connect to the server, right? In this case, we're not actually sending anything because the time service, simply when you connect, it's going to return your data, which is like the current time of the day. And let me just pull this up here. Hold on one second. Okay. And then we receive the data, and then we close the socket. So it's like 4 commands. There's an open command. And what you do is, the way this hardware that Arno works is, you're basically writing data, and this data can be some protocol, some predefined sequence of bytes, essentially, that you send out on a port. And so I created a protocol based on Berkeley sockets, like you mentioned, and basically what I did was I defined what the sequence of bytes should be that matches that Berkeley sockets protocol, which is implemented in C. So the first byte is, you're saying, I want to use the TCP/IP protocol. So this is going to route your command to my module instead of, say, Arno's module. And then you think about it, you add additional modules onto this card, depending on what byte you send here. Say this could be an HTTP module that you develop. So, and then you could have this custom HTTP protocol, or it could be protocol buffers, or it could be, whatever. And then the next byte I send is what TCPI command, and this is the socket command. I just need to let somebody in here. Hold on. Okay. And then the next byte says I want to use IP version 4 instead of IP version 6. And the next byte is, say, use TCP, not UDP. And the next byte is the version. And then you start, and then what this returns to you is a socket file descriptor. And then you just store that in this sockfd variable. And then going forward, any communication you want to make over that socket, you need to then pass that socket file descriptor. So then the next command, again, I'm sending a TCP/IP command. This is the connect command, because now I established a socket. Now I want to connect. Here's that socket file descriptor that I created before. This is an indicator to say I want to use a host name instead of an IP address. Then here I send out basically the host name string. Okay, it ends with a null. And then once the number of bytes that satisfy this particular command are sent, the TRS-80 will then actually send the request out to the internet service, whatever it is. In this case, it's the time service. It gets the response back, and then it streams it back on the port 31. And then we read, basically we're looking here for the status, right? If the status is 0, it's successful. If not, it's an error, and we just sort of error out. And then we receive the data. So the next command we send, again, TCP/IP. This is the receive command on this socket. We want to use blocking for this particular service. You can do blocking or non-blocking. And then you send the amount of data that you can handle. So this is your buffer, essentially, where you can start streaming data. And this is basically here streaming data and printing it out on the screen. And then you close the socket. Again, it's another command, and you close the socket. So basically what you have here is you have a TRS-80 basic programming doing TCP/IP communication to the internet.
That's amazing.
Yeah, where's line 1050?
What's
Oh,
the
it's 1005.
I get the point is that the hardware that I built, initially I did that only for accessing the retro store, but because of this very powerful microcontroller, you can repurpose it for different tasks. And so the thing that Pete and I have been discussing is basically creating a modular architecture that you can implement a module, and then my RetroStore access backend would just be one module. TRS-80 would be another module. Something else you could imagine is the microcontroller has a USB interface. So you could, for example, use a laptop as a data storage. So you could pass through accessing data on your laptop and then send it over to the TRS-80. So one thing we have not figured out it is a good name. So the hardware obviously is no longer just special purpose for RetroStore. It's kind of something generic, and we haven't really come up with a good name and how to rename, rebrand, and then the PCB and the hardware. Did you have an?
Looking for
the PUDA card. Call it the PUDA card.
The computer card.
No.
Hey, we've got Jimmy here.
Hey, Jimmy.
Jimmy, you're muted.
Hey guys,
Hey, how you going, buddy?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good to see the people I send my money to. What's your address for that TRS-80?
We'll and this is going to be a surprise to Arno, but I did create some prototype boards. Can you see them here? Yeah. See.
Ooh, is that version 1.0, 1.1? So Kyle made a nice pull request.
This is 1.1, yeah. And it's amazing. I ordered these from this place in China that Kyle mentioned, and I got 10 of these made and shipped to me under a week for less than $20.
Wow.
I don't see how this is possible, but hey, and they're good quality. They're not crap. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. They've really lifted their game, and there's no place in Australia or I think in the US that can even try to compete with that. No. So I just I'm
thinking they must be losing money, and it's sort of like an intellectual property theft ring.
Well, don't forget that out of the 20 you spent, 18 was shipping, so they do it for $2.
Right. They did it for $2. There's no way they're making it for $2. I don't know what their money-making game is, but.
Well, the thing is, the blank circuit boards are big, and if you get if people are getting boards made, and there's a small amount wastage on there. If you set up a computer to utilize the wastage that would otherwise not be used, and you can use the wastage on every board, and then sell it or whatever, then that's a way to sort of get smaller boards, out at almost next to nothing. But when we get around to Eric and myself, we'll talk a little bit about the Type 2 controllers. Those are large boards, and they also came fairly inexpensively for what they were. So
yeah, with second-day shipping. So
yeah, that was quite amazing.
So just kind of rounding up what Arno was saying, essentially what he designed, it's another more advanced computer on the same bus with the TRS-80, and they're just talking over the bus, right? And just with a few logic chips in there, just really only the one logic chip, and then you just have a couple of voltage transceivers or whatever, just to balance one, because the ESP32 runs at 3.3 volts and the TRS-80 is at 5 volts. So if the ESP32 ran at 5 volts, there'd only be that one small little GAL chip in there. And the logic in that GAL chip is really simple. So it's just two computers talking to each other over that expansion bus. And I'm sort of a purist when it comes to the hardware, but to me, the fact that you're not modifying the computer, it connects to the expansion bus, which is, the original Tandy engineers, that's why they put it there, to expand the capabilities of the machine. So that's what this is doing. It's just providing an additional way for the machine to communicate. So I don't think it violates any, vintage computer principles or you may have.
Hey, compared to the speed of the TRS-80 and the ESP, does the ESP just sort of sit there thinking, "What are we waiting for? This thing I'm connected to is so slow between responses. It's sitting there most of its time doing no ops or something." I would imagine it would be capable of much faster operation, but it goes as fast as it can, given that it's connected to a TRS-80.
Actually, Mev, I have a question. The microcontroller that is used for the threads, do you know the CPU speed?
Yeah, 40 megahertz. It sits there, twiddling its thumbs most of the time, waiting for this 4 megahertz computer to to talk to it. Yeah, 40 megahertz.
yeah, I think that somebody actually has a load set to do a 4 megahertz C80 CPM system on an ESP32. So you just emulate the whole thing on it. So
yeah.
So I did want to do just a quick demo of using Trisnic with one of my my applications, TrisPic. That's what's on the screen here. Can you see it? I don't know if I can make this. I don't know how to make this like the main spotlight video. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I can see it perfectly.
So you can just go in there. So this is going over. Wait, did I hear my? Mute that. Okay. So this is going using the RetroStore card with Trisnic on it. So searching Google Images. And this is going over that TCP/IP protocol. And if this was using the serial approach, it would be much slower. This is about the same speed as what I achieved with the M3SC. Actually,
yeah, I was gonna say that's pretty impressive, because that's about how quickly you can load a graphic image file from a thread onto one of these things. So it's getting the most out of the bus on that machine.
Right. I think it's probably just the limitation of actually the rendering, not the communication itself.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So there you go. So like I said, I'm working with Arno on it. This is an open source situation. So if anybody wants to contribute, come to the RetroStore or the Trisnic sites, and if you have an idea for a different module I could plug in, get in touch with us and join in and start writing some code. This is a community effort, so the more people that join, the better it'll be for everybody.
I just need a good name.
Yeah, we need a good name.
No,
Matt, do
that's
you want to
Everything,
talk about some items that you're working on?
Set up a poll for the name.
hey, Jimmy,
Hey,
where are you calling from anyway?
I'm in Oklahoma.
Oh,
Oklahoma. Oh, that's all
just
right.
right up the road from me.
Where you at?
I'm Plano, Texas.
Okay, yeah, just north. Well, I'm north.
Yeah, cool. You going to come along to Tandy Assembly this year, Jimmy?
Oh, one of my kids mentioned he'd like to go, so I'm thinking I'd really love to go. Really love to go.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. It's a good weekend. It's a good weekend. I mean, it's a bit of a drive, but
I love the TRS-80. The Trash Talk podcast got me more involved in it.
Oh,
What
that's good to hear.
what caused the problem?
I'm glad, I think we have some effect on the growth of the community.
I think you do. Yeah, I
That's
think
the
you
whole reason we did it and started it. So glad to hear that.
yeah, no, it has been good.
Dear Tandy Landers, we have both a TRS-80 Model 3 and Model 4, but they only have floppy disk drives, and one of them is starting to fail. I've been diagnosed with repetitive motion injuries from the hours spent swapping floppy disks back and forth. How can I end this madness and still enjoy my TRS-80? Signed, Wrecked Wrists.
Dear Wrecked Wrists, the answer is simple. You need the FRED, F-R-E-H-D, the TRS-80 hard drive emulator. The FRED stores your operating system and data on an SD card. It plugs easily into your TRS-80 Model 1, 3, or 4 and emulates the Tandy TRS-80 hard disk drive. No more swapping floppies every time you want to run a different program. Create multiple hard drive partitions on an SD card. Programs that run notoriously slow on floppy-based systems will run lightning fast with the FRED hard drive emulator. For information and pricing, contact Ian Maverick via email, ianm@trs-80.com.
How long until you break down?
Breakdown, a new game for the TRS-80 Model 1, 3, and 4.
Break down a wall, brick by brick with a bouncing ball. Hit each brick and watch them fall.
Put your mental stability to the test while dodging falling bricks and keeping your ball in play. Breakdown from PSKI Software Development is available as a free download. Just visit pski.net.
Before I talk about my stuff, why don't we get the latest from Kyle on the keyboard, the new Key 80.
Yeah, I could talk about Nuki 80 all day long, to be honest with you. But instead, I'll give you just kind of just a real quick maybe preview and overview of what it is, and kind of I've got one set up if we want to take a quick peek at it.
Sure.
Yes.
But just a quick history. I bought that Model 4 about a year ago. It was my first TRS-80 in 30 years. And I'll tell you what, that keyboard was just junk. It must have been sitting for years, 20 years, and half the keys didn't work. So step one was I watched Mav's video, great videos, of course, as always, where he shows how to, unsolder each key. You clean them off, and then you resolder them back in. So after I took all the keys off and cleaned them, put them all back in. That's quite an operation. There's a lot of keys.
And then swore you'd never do that ever again.
Yeah, you know what? There's actually 4 connections on each key, so you can do the math on that.
Yeah. So
then I had a keyboard that worked about 90%, which was a real heartbreaker after all that work. So, I got a couple of spare keys from Mav and put those in, and I eventually had like a keyboard that worked pretty good. But even so, some keys, if I didn't use it for a week or so, some of those keys, you had to bang on them a little bit, and then they'd start working again. So, that kind of sucks. And I said, there's got to be a way to maybe hook up a keyboard to this thing. So I started looking around on the internet for some kind of adapter. And I saw them for other computers, but nobody had one for the TRS-80. I'm not an electronics guy. I don't, I know a little bit about resistors and capacitors, but I've never built anything. But boy, I tell you, I just kind of sat down and looked at the schematic for the TRS-80, and it seemed like it's just a mechanical keyboard. There's no circuitry. It's really just two connections connecting together. So I figured I could do something with this. And sure enough, after a while, I got a little Arduino for the logic, just some real basic chips, and put some stuff together. And eventually I had, one key working, through my new little adapter. And once you get one key working, then you can get all the keys working. So sure enough, I was able to tweak it a little bit, got the keys working. I added some extra chips to let you hold down multiple keys, because a lot of these keyboard adapters use a multiplexer, so you can only push one key at a time. Whereas if you're playing a game or something, you need to use the arrow keys and the space bar, and so I had to add a little extra logic to handle what I call the special keys, so you can hold down multiple keys at once. So that all started at the PS2 interface, because that's the easiest for the Arduino to handle. And then I figured, well, most people want to use a USB keyboard if they're going to go down this path, because the PS2 keyboards are getting a little harder to find. So I was able to kind of figure out how to get USB working. And so I made a USB version of this card, the NuKey 80. And then just finally, a week or two ago, I was able to get the PS2 and the USB working on the same card. So it's been kind of a journey with some different versions. But now I think I'm really kind of where I wanted to be in the beginning. It's just one small interface card. It fits inside of the TRS-80 Model 3 or Model 4. And it can handle PS2 or a USB keyboard. Now, I agree with Pete and Mav that I am kind of a purist as well. But boy, I'll tell you, after you use a modern keyboard on this TRS-80, it sure is nice. The quote is where it should be. The semicolon is where it should be. So I kind of go back and forth as to where I stand on using a modern keyboard. But if nothing else, if your keyboard is broke, it sure is an easy way to kind of get yourself up and running again. And
I'm predicting it'll be a big hit, because that problem with the Model 4 keyboards in particular is it really sort of ruins the spirit of a lot of people who are trying to use their machines. The rest of it can be kind of sorted out fairly easily. Changing a couple of capacitors on the power supply is easy. Cleaning your disk drive heads and lubricating the rails for most people is pretty easy. Or if the disk drives don't work properly, you can just plug in a Fred or a M3 SE or something and get use out of the computer. But if all or nearly all of your keys don't work, it's there's very little you can do except decide to allocate however many days it is to desolder these 70 keys, clean them, put them back in, and hope for the best. So the Model 3 is a little bit more forgiving in that they came with two types of keyboards: the Alps keyboard with 2 lugs and the Alps keyboard with 4 lugs. Most of them, the ones with the 2 lugs, are a proper actual physical key switch, as opposed to a rubber dome type of arrangement, and so they can be fixed a lot more quicker on the Model 3. But the Model 4, all of the keyboards for it, very difficult to find one in perfect condition. And in fact, when I restore a Model 4 for resale, that's what I spend the longest amount of time on, is the fixing the keyboard and making sure the keyboard's working properly, because that's the first thing people call you back about if they receive a computer and the key doesn't work properly. So in terms of the development of the USB version, was that quicker to develop than the PS2 one once all the background work had been done with the PS2 protocol, or?
It added a little bit of complexity. First of all, the USB chip is an extra $10, so I kind of hate to do that because it costs a little more. But The code itself is it's almost the same. It's pretty straightforward. But it does have that level shifting problem where the USB chip runs at 5 volts, or at 3.3, and then the Arduino runs at 5 volts. So I had to throw a couple of those level shifters in there as well. But no, overall it was pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Kyle, how do you connect to the TRS-80 itself from the Arduino?
Yeah, so there's just a normal 20-pin connector, like the normal keyboard connector would be.
Hold one up, Kyle. Hold one up.
Oh yeah, okay. Let's see.
Yeah.
Let me just see if I can stand by 1 second. I was going to try to throw it on my phone.
Yeah, so you're connecting. You should be connecting here shortly.
So there's a pull-off connector from the keyboard to the motherboard that you just simply then plug into. Is that how it works?
Yeah,
or?
basically there's a 20p IDC connector on it.
Okay. So what kind of Arduino do you use?
Stand by. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let me just come over here. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
So there's just a 20-pin connector right here. And that I provide this cable with the Nuki 80. And what you do is you unplug your original keyboard. You plug in the new cable that I provide. The old keyboard, if you want, plugs into a little, I've got multiple connectors on that thing, so you can plug your old keyboard in as well. And then the end just plugs into the Nuki 80 here. You'll see it has a USB connector and the PS2. And the one it uses is determined by whichever firmware you've got loaded in the Arduino here, which you update just the normal micro USB. You download either the USB or the PS2 firmware. The only other connection you need is power, 5 volts. This particular Model 3 doesn't have disk drives, so it's nice and empty in here. But you just you can tap into just a 5-volt line. On this particular Model 3, it had a spare aux. I don't know if it was for maybe the RS-232 board or something, that it was just being unused, so I was able to just tap into that. With the Nuki 80, I also include a Molex power cable that plugs into the disk drive. It's kind of a Y splitter, so you don't need to cut any wires or anything. It just plugs into the disk drive power. So let me just fire this thing up, and I'll show you just real quick how that works. Normal cassette prompt. Right now I've got a USB keyboard hooked up here. And it does what a keyboard's supposed to do. It's got a couple of fun things that you can do. First of all, you can use the original keyboard at the same time. So you can switch back and forth. I don't know why you'd want to, but you can. Once you have control over the keyboard, you can do all kinds of fun things. For example, you can reset the machine with Control-Alt-Delete. So if your old keyboard isn't working, you can still reset. I've got some kind of shortcuts, what I'll call like help or something. So if you hit, for example, Control-Alt-A, it'll tell you the version and what mode, Model 3 or Model 4 mode.
Control-Alt-H has just a real quick help screen. So it shows the shortcuts about the TRS-80, reset the keyboard adapter, and then you can switch Model 3 or Model 4 mode.
That's a neat way
It
of
supports upper and lower case.
getting information onto the screen through the keyboard. Cool.
Yeah. And then the last thing is, I know it's kind of hard to see here, but I added a feature that Arno might like. It's Control-Alt-Star. And what that does is it loads the Retro Store Card basic loader.
Nice.
And then it'll run it.
Okay, that's sweet.
So there you got the Retro Store up and running, and you don't have to remember that stinking address.
Very nice.
Wow, you no longer have to type in the programs from the magazines. The computer will do it for you. I love it.
Yeah. No, it's good. And the thing is as well, with the USB keyboards, it opens you up to sort of quality keyboards like Dask keyboard or any of the Cherry MX ones that people really like at the moment, as finding sort of quality high-end keyboards with a PS2 connector can be a bit of an ask. I mean, I've got a few. My favourite, and a lot of vintage computer people's favourite keyboards, the IBM Model M PS2 keyboard. They call it the buckling spring keyboard. It actually does work with the new Key 80. Initially, when I plugged it in, it wouldn't work, but I found that if you press the reset button on the new Key 80 after you turn everything on, then the IBM keyboard works great. And I think the only reason for that is that the IBM keyboard is so old that it's just too slow for the Arduino polling or something to detect that it's there. But once you hit reset, it actually starts working. But and I've tried about 13 or 14 other different PS2 keyboards, and they all work a treat. So yeah, so this is a great little device.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I had one keyboard that didn't work PS2, and my Mac keyboard won't work under USB. But all the other ones I've tried do seem to work okay.
Yeah.
And it also, let me say, it also lets you hit the break key when you boot up so that you can go into basic. So, that's kind of a nice feature too.
So you've thought of everything.
I tried to. And let me just finish up on this new Key 80. Some of the enhancements I'm looking at is I'm going to add a joystick port and macro recording capability. I'm not sure that it's super necessary, but like I said, once you have control of the keyboard, you can do all kinds of interesting things.
The joystick port would be good. All it really needs to do is activate the left, right, up and down key and the space bar, and sort of 90% of TRS-80 games would probably work pretty well.
That's exactly right.
Very cool.
Actually, maybe you can also create some meta commands that you intercept, that where you can change the behavior. So like talking about games, I mean, cursor keys, yes, are most commonly used, but there's games that have special keys, like Cosmic Fighter. You have to press D to dock. Maybe there's an additional joystick key. I'm thinking if you could send a special keyboard sequence that you intercept on your card to change its behavior. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you could also create support for some of, more modern controllers like an Xbox controller and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, the other thing I was thinking is maybe like what do they call that? A Bluetooth. So you could use a little Bluetooth dongle in that USB port, and that opens up the whole world.
What about speech to text? You need a microphone.
And like all good retro hardware or hardware for retro computers, it's great that it just goes in and works without requiring extensive modifications to the computer. It's always a case of it's hard sometimes to want to produce something that requires a lot of potentially problematic modifications needed to be done to the computer to make it work. I've sort of moved away from making products which require a lot extensive trace cutting and stuff inside the computer, if at all possible, because I think that most of the people that are interested in this sort of stuff like the purist aspect of things.
Kyle, what's the pricing in those Arduino modules that you're using?
You know, that's another kind of downside is the original Arduino is really cheap. It's like, I don't know, $3 or something crazy. But in order to get those multiple key presses, I need some more ports. So I had to actually go with what they call I think it's the 2560, the Mega Arduino. And those I'm getting for about $13 or $14.
Okay.
And the USB chip is like 10. And as terms of, we were talking about next, projects for 2019. In addition to that crazy new TRS-80 stuff, I was also looking at maybe Mav can help me with this. I was thinking of a RAM switcher for like when I've got the Fred RAM in and I want to go back to the original. It seems like a pretty easy thing just to have a little board with 2 ROMs on it or 3 ROMs on it. Has there been something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, it depends which computer. I think, Eric, were you about to tell us about the NF6X?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for the Model 3 and 4, right? Or is it just Model 4?
I think it's for the Model 4 gate array and Model 4D. That's sort of been done. Though to be honest, it's a really handy thing. But most people that I've spoken to who have used it find that they rarely have to switch between ROMs. But it is a handy thing. It allows you to have a customized ROM in there to do experimentation and things like that. Another thing that's worth thinking about, and you would have seen it, Eric, at TA18 was Rude Brewers has an adapter which has a lot of promise. Actually, I'm keen to see how he goes with that. Which basically puts the ROM from a Model 2 on a wire or a cable out of the back of the computer, and there you can just change ROMs as needed and switch between them for people that are doing experimentation on those machines. But there's no reason why it wouldn't work on any machine with a 24-pin ROM on it. So yeah, that's 2 examples of the sorts of things Kyle's talking about.
You know what would be neat would be to stick one of these ESP32s in there instead and do the ROMs in software. You could customize them, switch them in and out programmatically. You could go all kinds of crazy.
Well, I was thinking at least a 64K ROM, so you could just have one chip and you could select between the different ones. But the last thing, I don't want to hog the whole show, but the last thing I was thinking about doing was adding some kind of a buffered cable for the Fred so it could work with some of these other cards, like the Retro Store card. That seems pretty straightforward too, doesn't it?
Actually, I would also second that idea. Fred is not, at least to my understanding, not a good citizen on the I/O bus, and it shouldn't be that difficult to. I mean, we have to make some hardware changes, but that shouldn't be too difficult.
It's probably something worth working towards, yeah.
Especially, I know Mav's got that sound card and then the Retro Star card, so it seems like we need some kind of multi-port I/O bus that these things can work together on.
Well, you just need to use open collector connections on the way into the TRS-80. I think that's what Fred is not doing. It just claims ownership of the bus all the time, even though it's not being addressed, and that's the problem. I think.
all sorts of things that weren't a big concern at the time that it was designed. But I hear, it's. I was actually I was surprised as much as anyone when I thought I've built the first Orchestra 90 repro, and I thought, oh, this isn't going to work. I wonder what it's going to sound like or do on the bus or anything. And the fact that it worked straight away without any modifications or anything was quite surprising. So I'm kind of I've got to sort of plug a few more things into the bus with the Fred and try and make a sort of a catalogue of sorts of what does and doesn't work, and then we can sort of look at them on a case by case basis and see a way to make them work. But even things like a Tris stick, which is a aftermarket joystick for the Model 4 that plugs into the I/O bus. Would be interesting to see how that works, but it has a card edge connector, which makes it difficult to plug it in. But all these things are worthwhile trying.
And it's definitely doable, because my 4D right here, I have the RetroStore card and the M3SC on the same bus, and they work together very well. So,
yeah, cool.
Maybe Pete Bartlett will give you some secrets.
Where is Pete Bartlett today, anyway?
He's not here. He's building Mises.
He's building Mises. He's from Colorado, isn't he? He's probably skiing as well, or
just before we let Kyle, Kyle, when are we going to get a Model 2 version of that keyboard adapter?
I just need to take a look at the schematics to see what we're dealing with. And Model 1 there's been some interest in Model 1 as well, but that one actually has some circuitry on the board that you would need to work around.
Model 2 is easy. It's just a serial.
Oh, that's right. You said that.
Yeah, so actually, you should do the Model 2 first.
And then the last thing I wanted to do is I'm looking to write some assembly language stuff, maybe a game or something, follow your lead.
Cool. All right. Look forward to it. All right, Matt.
Well, the TRS-80's been sort of hanging out for a version of Lemmings for the Model 1 and 3, so sounds like a plan. Do you want to talk about what I've been working on? And
yeah.
So probably at the end of last year in December, those on the Facebook page or the Discord would have seen that I've been producing some things that I've had the designs for a while from Prof 80, and that includes the Model 1 serial board and the Orchestra 90 repro, and they both work pretty well. I've sort of gone public making those, and they seem to be relatively interesting to people. The Orchestra 90 in particular, there's a fair amount of music out there for it, but I was kind of thinking, and I have to run this by Dusty, but I'm sure he'll go for it, is maybe a competition to write some new songs for the Orchestra 80, Orchestra 90 as this year's competition in the TRS 8-bit newsletter. So that's one thing I'm sort of looking forward to. I've also from a Coco side of things, I've decided to start writing an article for each issue, which at this stage I think is quarterly, of the new electronic Rainbow magazine. So that will give me something different from the normal Z80 machines to write about, I think. But the main one that's sort of been taking most of my time is a few people who were at Tandy Assembly might have seen in one corner was a Model 12, which belongs to Eric, that had a Fred modified to work off it. And so we've sort of been messing around with a thing called a Fred 4.8, which is one of these here. It is it's a regular Fred that has had a bunch of modifications done to it so that it will work with a 8-inch TRS-80. A few people have got them, and they're messing around with them, and they're working pretty well. So if anything, 2019 is sort of going to be the year of products for the 8-inch machines. Hopefully, about time, says Peter. So, in order to connect one of these though to a 8-inch TRS-80, there's no 50-way bus just to plug in. We need what's called a Type 2 hard disk controller, which has always been hard to find, and when you can find them, they've been expensive and just very difficult to find. So a few years ago, also Prof 80 did a reverse engineer of the Type 2 controller card, and they do work. So I've never really had a lot of incentive to build them because, well, I've got one here. I'll show you. They're a very large and complex old school style card. There's one in red. So that one's had the sockets and resistors put on, but it still requires me to put all the capacitors and then stuff all the chips in and everything. So these will be, I don't know if they're going to be economically viable, but they're one of those things that will be doable if there's a need for it. And so I've been working with Eric on that. So we had this idea that we'd build some and do a talk at Tandy Assembly. Well, we thought we'd build some, and I said we'd do a talk at Tandy Assembly 2019. That's a bit closer, isn't it, Eric? I'm sure after last year's drive, you'd probably prefer to fly up to Tandy Assembly than drive stuff. But
the drive wasn't bad. The drive wasn't bad. No, yeah. So I'll drive and I'll bring the system again, and we can have something to show.
Well, looks like you're already building them, Av.
Well, Eric can talk a little bit about the 5 boards that he got made, and the sort of we'll talk a bit between ourselves about the difficulties of getting some of the parts for them. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the boards, Eric?
Yeah, I found a fab shop. Well, first I tried Osh Park, and for 3 boards they wanted upwards of $260 for 3 of them. So then I found a Chinese board shop and uploaded it, and 5 boards, it started out like $35 prior to shipping. And then wanted the gold fingers, so that added a little bit, and the heavier copper traces, and then of course the board in red to match the Fred 48. And all told, with 2-day shipping, I think, what was it, $65 for 2-day shipping for 5 boards. And those aren't small boards.
Yeah, it was from the same place that Pete got his boards from. So it was
it scales up. It scales up too. So the price per board is less, if we were to order, say, 10 or 15 or whatever, but we want to start out small, just proof of concept. And I wanted to build up 1 board complete, and then build up 1 board and figure, what's the minimum you need to control the Fred off of it. Obviously, if you've got, say, the second bank in a Model 12 or a second 64K RAM card, you don't need the 16K on the Type 2 controller board. So that could reduce the complexity and price.
So going back to sort of this one here, so what we've got on these is there's a 16K RAM bank along here, which is the one that Eric's talking about. So if your Model 12 or 16 has it on the motherboard, conceivably get away with without that. And some of the other chips on here may be involved with controlling that and could be left out. Now, the thing that's made making these kind of both a headache but fun at the same time is that a lot of the parts, a lot of them on here are obsolete parts which just cannot be bought anywhere for love nor money other than from surplus stores on the internet, because the Mouses and the Jamaicos and places like that just do not have parts like what's a good one? The DP8304 and 8303 pair of tri-state buffers. We've got some 8T26 chips which do something. Although it looks like it's mainly basically 20, 16, and 14 pin 74 LSs. Once you actually look at the thing, there's a lot of variation in speed and capability devices in there. So there's plain 74s, there's 74 ALS, there's 74 Fs, there's 74 ASs, all ones which are difficult to source. If it was built up based around 74 LS, it would be a piece of cake. But because it requires all these variations on the 74 family, they can be difficult to find. Having said that, some of these obsolete parts, while they are hard to find, when you do find them, they are not particularly expensive. Like this big 28-pin one in the middle, it's actually the biggest chip on the board, is a Z80 CTC controller. It's a timer. It is fairly obtainable for sort of the $3 to $4 mark when you can find it at a surplus place, but you can't readily get it from a lot of other places.
Yeah, and don't forget the Valor delay line.
The delay line is going to be the biggest headache. Yeah, they're just literally are not available anywhere. So yeah, we use a different delay line adapted to it to accomplish the same thing, and yeah, so it's a good little project, and I'll be glad to see one up and running, and then we can you know, show them off to other people who are interested in the 8-inch machines. I mean the Fred 4.8, which that guy there. Well, people have asked about the naming convention. It's Fred 4 8-inch systems, so that's what we call it, the Fred 4.8. I may make these available on a very limited basis to certain customers after sort of explaining to them what they require in their machine, and to make sure that they've got the correct card and that their expectations of what it will do can match what Fred 4.8 can provide at the moment. Like, it's good running Tristos 2, and it's also good for running CPM at the moment, though we're still working. It may take a while before we get Xenix running on it, but I reckon if it could get Xenix running, it would be a real game changer for the 8-inch systems.
Certainly. Do you have any idea what the pricing is going to be at? I mean, what it would cost to build something like that?
Fred 4.8 will be the same pricing as the basic Fred system, so about $130 odd.
What about the board, the Type 2 interface?
The Type 2 interface, I'd like to actually be able to sell them for around or under 150 US. I think once you're above that, it's starting to sort of people started thinking that they don't really want to go down that path, because you need both of them to get it up and running. But once we've built a few of them, we'll have a good idea of how long it takes to make them and how hard it was to get the parts. Like, at the speed that I solder at, all those sockets I was able to solder them on in just under an hour. So, and that actually turns out to be the biggest part of it. The rest of it is really just, I don't know, it looks like about 60 or 70 capacitors and some test points and a connector. So, and the good thing about the design as well is that it doesn't require a lot of messing around once it's together, as you don't have to hook it up to a Crow to set pre-compensation or other, settings before it will work. It just plugs in and goes. So,
Arno, that's the board we need to run the RetroStore card to connect it to the 8-inch machines. It would connect to that interface board.
Well, I do have a Model 3 at home, but
in theory, it should work. I mean, the purpose of this card was actually to take a Model 3 bus, a Model 2 1216 bus on the bottom here and output it to a 50-pin bus, which has the same signals as a Model 3 or 4. So I hadn't thought of that, but it might work actually.
Well, I actually did try it, and it's not working out of the box. So I think we have to look at it. I'm not sure if it's passing port 31 or not to the 50-pin bus.
But I mean, it doesn't crash the system or start smoking or anything. It just
No,
needs some software written for it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I send it to port 31. It doesn't get to the board, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
I know that I'm not sure if that board is passing all of the ports.
Mm.
So
I can look at the schematics and see.
yeah, it may just be we would have to just change the port number that the Trisnik is listening on.
Yeah, that's one thing that Ian and I have discussed is maybe since we can't get the DIP version of the delay line, we can get the SMD version. So maybe making a couple of board updates for that. And if it's a matter of the port not being passed through, we might be able to easily modify it so it passes with the other ports as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. And the other thing, of course, is I'm going to fly out again to Tandy Assembly. And that sounds like a good time to give us any information you got on it, Pete.
Yeah. So speaking of Tandy Assembly, hey, Mike, are you still with us?
I am.
Hey, Mike Rowan.
Yeah, how you doing?
Geez, you're patient. You haven't said a word for 1 hour, 26 minutes.
Oh, just soaking it all in. To enjoy the show.
Or should I say ease of use? That's no one there will get it, but that's it's a common expression in the Cocoa community. That's how they open and close every conversation they have.
So you guys know Mike is the president of Tandy Assembly, and we do have dates for next year. It's going to be Mike, just correct me if I'm wrong here. It's going to be the 28th and the 29th of September, right?
That's correct.
Yep.
In Springfield, Ohio.
Same venue as last year?
Yes.
Yep.
So they're having us back.
That's right. I guess we didn't trash a place too much. Unintended.
I wonder if they expected more people. That's not to say we didn't get enough people. We got more people than the previous year, which is what we aim for. But
yes.
I wonder how big a convention they're used to having at a place like that.
I'm not sure. I'm sure they have some big gatherings, but not like ours.
I mean, yeah, we pretty much filled up that speaker room for some of the bigger talks. So, yeah, I think we represented well.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's still early days, but it's going to be a similar format. We'll have the auction, probably the quiz show again. We'll have to find some stronger competition for Mav. The quiz show.
Or disqualify Mav.
Or how about a handicap?
Or he can ask the question. He can stop.
That's right. Make him a judge.
Yeah, the winner asks the questions next time.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Although
people would have to understand me then.
Oh yes.
Well, we've got a video. We've got that video that you posted that we can
and there is some talk about maybe doing a Friday, right? Or a Friday session.
Well, we're looking at it.
We're looking at it, yeah. We have to see if the logistics work out.
Yeah.
So what does a Friday session usually consist of at a VCF event? Because I've never been to a VCF event. That's probably...
It's usually just kind of all kinds of, well, a VCF's big enough, you usually have a big menu to choose from, but they have sessions like someone might have a session on CRT repair, and someone might have, just some kind of computer science topic or a specific vintage computer. So it's kind of all over the place. They're usually hour and a half long sessions.
More like educational classroom type instead of presentations or speakers. Well, I think some of that happens.
Yeah.
If there's maybe smaller presentations that aren't worthy or don't justify a large full room sort of presentation would happen on Friday as well.
Well, things that are too niche market for a broad presentation.
Right. So we'll see. But if we do, I know we do have several people volunteering to give those talks or, you know, hold those sessions. But we'll see. To the audience here, is there anything at Tandy Assembly you'd like to see that we haven't done, or what we could do better? We're perfect.
Oh, was that
That's
a
what we like to
general
hear.
question to everyone? Because
Yeah, it's out to everyone.
it just sounded like a cell phone dropout. You know, I was trying not to roll my eyes.
What can we do better? What would you like to see?
This is John. For some reason there's a big echo going on everyone. I haven't been yet, but I was just going to mention, along with, you know, what we're doing for the next year, I definitely agree with the balance of, you know, new and old hardware. For me personally, my main interest, whether it's old cars or my old rotary phone or turntable or whatever, it's keeping old hardware running in a daily use type of configuration. I just like keeping old things running. So anything on the show that can cover, you know, common problems, how to fix them, directions towards, you know, helpful videos or maintenance things you should be doing, all that kind of stuff. So any kind of you know, hardware classes that I don't, maybe you already have this at the assembly, but you know, in this area we've got a machine torn apart with someone walking through how it works and can show you how to fix various common things, you know, kind of a hardware tear down and repair on the different types of machines would certainly be interesting to me. So just wanted to throw that out there for my primary interest of keeping like original system, original configuration hardware running and usable as long as possible.
That sounds good. Have you been to VCFs, John?
No, I haven't. You know, my life has kind of gone from old cars to old electronics to now old computers. It's kind of a new area for me. And I'm a mechanical engineer also, and I've done some programming through the years. So I also want to get more into the programming piece. But no, I've never been to VCF or anything. But that would just jumps into my mind. It would be interesting to have that kind of area.
I was just going to say I like old cars too. I used to, for years, just get my hands dirty with these old classic cars that I have around here. And now I'm doing computer stuff. It's a lot easier on my back than.
I was just going to say, I think about the time I got tired of laying underneath old Volkswagens was the time I started getting interested in old computers. So.
Yeah, I remember, you know, when I was 24 or 25, I could pull a 13B engine out of my RX-7 in about 3 hours, and then I had to do one a couple of years ago with an RX-2 I bought, and it took me 2 days to get it out. And I thought I've clearly lost the touch for working on old cars. I eventually got there, but at the end of it, I've sort of. Now I haven't picked up a spanner and gotten back to that car for 6 months, but you know, but sort of what tends to happen with the I mean, Mike can sort of confirm this or not, but we get guest speakers to come along to Tandy Assembly, and then once those guys are locked in, if we can't get enough speakers, or for example, we could fill in the time with tutorials and things like that, and you know, reach out to people who want to run tutorial type things, or alternately just add another day on the front of the Tandy Assembly to try to accommodate some more of those pedestrian type things.
Yeah, I think we found that this year we actually had a few less speakers, and we think the show actually flowed better. When you have too many speakers, people, feel like they have to attend as many as they can, and then you end up having very little time being spent on the show floor and that sort of thing. I think we found that experience with a lot of people. So.
Yeah, I think that's the general consensus. It's allows people a lot more free time, and of course Saturday evening is full of free time. I think that's where I know that's where I get a chance to work on hardware and get some things accomplished with all the experts there. So
right,
it's a great time. If you haven't been, you should come.
And some of the less popular sessions, may have only a few people attending, which could be not nice to the presenter. Let's put it that way. So I think it's good for the speaking sessions on the main 2 days that they should be fairly popular, and they should be like with our podcast, quality over quantity.
Yeah. Though having said that, I can't recall that there was ever less than, say, 30 people in any one of the 6 talks at Tandy Assembly. So it's definitely, they're pretty much hitting the mark for the most part. They're getting a good turnout to all of them. Just changing direction for a moment, we've got a question come through from Dusty asking for an update on, from George on his emulator, and maybe George can tell us how it's going and what improvements are going to be we're going to see in the new year.
Sure, I can talk about that. At the moment, got a number of bug fixes in the queue. Various things, especially handling the floppy disk drive emulation and so on. And so been working on that with Peter, my brother, to get all those bugs fixed. And there's a few other things and various feature requests. And at the moment, I'm kind of hoping to get that out as soon as possible. Then from there, I don't know if I'll take a little bit of a break on the emulation, or if I'll go on and maybe cover off some of the missing items like hard drives and RS-232 ports and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you for all your work you're doing in that regard, George.
It's an impressive emulator.
It sure is.
Well,
and I don't have
thanks,
to
you're
use
welcome.
name anymore. Thank God.
Yeah.
Also, another question for George. I didn't actually get a lot of time to have a look at how the emulated Model 1 that you had at Tandy Assembly, how it all fit together and worked. But feedback I got from Geordie was that it was pretty good. So did you want to just sort of give a 25-word explanation of how that's accomplished?
Sure. Maybe switch the camera here. I can take a picture of it. Let's see. Because I've got the thing sitting here. Let's see if I can take a look at it.
That's my sort of workshop.
Yeah, it's basically the exact opposite of what the Nuki 80 does, and it is basically just a Model 3 keyboard that's been ripped out of it, and you can see here it's just hooked up by an ad hoc ribbon cable up to a Raspberry Pi. So we hacked, and I use the term advisedly, a version of the TRS-80 GP emulator to run on the Pi. And it just uses the GPIO pins to scan the keyboard and pass that on to the emulator. So it's really like running TRS-80 GP on a Raspberry Pi, but except using a real TRS-80 keyboard. There's a couple of hardware glitches to still work out. There's something I'm not doing quite right electrically with the scanning, and so you can't press keys that exist in the same column for some reason. It starts to alias and do weird things. But the reset button is hooked up. That does actually work.
Gets a lot of use, does it?
Yeah. I say we had sort of the Tandy assembly, the demo was carefully constructed to work, and the reset button actually exited the emulator and was just running on a shell script. So the emulator would start up and it would run this Galaxy Invasion. If you press reset, it would exit, and then the shell script would start it up running Cosmic Fighter, and then we had a third one in the rotation whose name escapes me, but so it's a cute little hack. I mean, and the only problem is that the things we did to make it work were kind of sketchy, so it's hard to see how to actually release it and be useful to people. As an example, we wrote directly to the frame buffer, but on my Raspberry Pi, it's still running the X server and it's still updating the clock in the upper right hand of the screen. So the way I got around that was I would run a terminal emulator and make sure it's overlapping the clock, so that the clock wouldn't erase what the TRS-80 was doing, since, you know, the thing was hacked together.
Awesome.
It was pretty fascinating. It is. Like I said, I saw it running, and it shows what can be done with these sort of mini, Raspberry Pis and things like that. Every so often on sort of internet forums and so on, people ask, why doesn't someone just redesign the whole motherboard into a Raspberry Pi and just install it into one of the feet inside of a Model 1 case or something like that? And it's kind of like, yeah, it's probably pretty cool to do. And what you're doing sort of shows that it's not as simple as just what people are asking to do, but with enough dedication you can get a result.
It looks like we're getting into Coco territory as far as peripherals and devices being developed. It's really great to see this sort of activity in the Z80 community.
Well, some new software would be good, but I'm loath. I'm the last person who is going to actually sit down and write new software. But it's kind of because my main interest is in hardware, so that's where I am happy to put most of my energies. But I think we'll get to a point in the next few years where people will start pulling out their assemblers and compilers and stuff, and start making some software to take advantage of all the changes in the new hardware and the changes in style. Like there's games or elements of games that are out at the moment that could be done on computers on old computers that would that the authors at the time wouldn't have thought of. So something like that would be pretty cool.
Hey, has there been a RAM expansion for the Model 3 or 4?
You mean from me or just back in the day?
In general, is that possible? Has it been done? Like 512K or anything? You talk about the Coco, and I know there's all kinds of memory expansions for the Coco.
Memory expansions all do one thing. They all bank switch between the RAM banks. The computer itself, Coco or a model or a Z80 machine, can only access up to 64K at a time. So the essence of RAM expansions are the switching circuitry to switch between each bank, and so whichever one it's working on at any given time, the other banks have to retain the information there so that when they switch back to them, it's still there. And in fact, those have been around for years for TRS-80s. I think it was Anitech or Alpha Products or both made 512K, 1 meg, 4 meg, 8 meg memory expansions for Model 3 and 4 computers, and they're very hard to find, and they had very limited application because a lot of people at the time really were only using their computers for mainly the main use of memory expansion was word processing. So the better word processors like LaScript or AllWrite looked to see if there was extra RAM there, and then gave you an enormous buffer. And the other thing that was popular for was RAM disks, because if you're thinking about the years sort of 1988 to 1992, even the cheapest hard disks at the time were still pretty expensive. So RAM disks were something that were a big thing. I made for a little while, though I don't advertise that I sell them anymore, a 512K upgrade for the Model 1. Those that bought them, I think, were pretty happy with them, but the fact is that they require a lot of hacking around inside the computer, and I just thought, yeah, it's someone's going to run into trouble, and that's going to be a problem. So I don't really go down that path. But what is interesting, though, is you've got. I was hoping Steve Hall would join us on this thing, but he's from the UK as well, and he's a gentleman who bought a 4P and found an accelerator board with 256K of RAM expansion on it inside a 4P, and a lot of us who like to reverse engineer stuff have been after one of those for a while to try and make an upgrade for a Model 4 that not only adds memory but also adds some speed and some extra functions, and that would be a fun thing to then write software for. So yeah,
I'd love to see that reverse engineered.
I've seen them. I've seen a few of them over the years, and they are, as complexity goes, there's kind of at the top level of complexity for TRS-80 cards. I mean, the Type 2 controller that I was showing you is complex in that it's got a lot of parts, but the actual layout of the board is probably no more difficult than a Model 1 or a Model 3 motherboard. But the accelerator boards are very densely packed, lots of parts. But yeah, there'll be a project and a half.
Very cool. All right, well, unless we had something else to talk about on the schedule, I think we will call it tonight.
Dusty, is he still around? Has he sorted out his mic problems?
I did have a quick question, if I could.
Sure.
While I have you guys. So as far as my coming year, I got a little hardware glitch that I need to work on. I might reach out to Mav or something before I take things apart. Hopefully simple, but I also want to, as a mechanical engineer, I've done a fair bit of programming, but always pretty simple, basic or C or Fortran or something, just to solve other engineering problems. And I wrote a pretty simple game just in BASIC when I got my machine, just because I wanted that experience. But I've never done anything with machine language. So I've thought, well, I'm going to use this TRS-80 just as a very early beginnings way of experimenting with that. But I have no idea where to even start. I want to take my game and put it in machine language just to speed it up. But I don't have the first clue as to how to write something in machine language or how to go about doing it. So I just wondered if there was a resource you guys could point me to that would just kind of give me an introductory primer on how to do that.
Well, just to give you an idea, and not to discourage you, because if you're a mechanical engineer, you'll be able to sort of learn this stuff fairly quickly. But I did learn BASIC in the first night that I bought the computer, but it took me 6 months to learn assembler. So it gives you some idea of the complexity involved. The best place to start would be the classic books that Tandy released, which were by William Barden.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're a good starting point, and then just look online at the various tutorials in Z80 assembler. Mainly, once you've got things like your editor assembler worked out and your memory map and you start going through the exercises of how to how to write your assembly code and get your head around the Boolean algebra, then what happened with me anyway, and I've actually since lost this ability, but it sort of was a lot of learning Z80, and then one day it just all clicked and it all fell into place and I understood it. And then I didn't do any, after I'd stopped programming in Z80 after a few decades, I'd forgotten the process again, and so I'm kind of back at the beginning point. But there's no, it's one of those things, assembly language for any processor, there's no quick or surefire way to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I certainly know it won't be simple, and I appreciate that versus the programming I've done. But lately I've kind of, after career of mechanical engineering, I've just had more interest and have taken a couple of computer science classes and learned more about the structure behind all of these things and how memory works and some of these different aspects of computer science. And I thought, well, a fun way to get my hands really dirty on how that stuff works would be to just do something on my Model 1 in assembly language. So I was just looking for a starter, and I see Dusty offered me a link there too to look into some stuff. So I just appreciate that. Was just looking for kind of a where to begin other than just a random Google search. So
yeah,
get that little blue book from William Barden with the Model 1 on the front. That's pretty much where we all started. And has your Model 1 got disk drives or just a cassette player?
Just the cassette. Yep.
Yeah, look for the cassette assembler on, ask someone to donate it to you, or look for it on eBay, and that's how most of us sort of started out, with the exercises in that.
I will say though that working with a cassette assembler is going to be very frustrating for you.
I've heard you guys mention that before. Yeah, heard that.
I would recommend using George Phillips's ZMAC assembler, and just running it even in one of the, you learn how to program using the ZMAC assembler, because you can do it right on your modern PC, use a modern editor, and run it in one of the emulators. Get it working one of the emulators, like even George's emulator, Model 1 emulators. And then when you have it running there, then think about transferring it to the real Model 1. Okay. Unless you're really looking for the vintage experience, but it's going to take you 10 times longer to develop on the Model 1 than it is going to learn and develop on your Mac or your PC.
Yeah,
that's true. I think people that mainly write assembly software for modern computers, whether it's a Coco or a Z80 based machine, tend to do all the work on a PC with modern assemblers and the speed that goes along with that and the debugging abilities. And then when they're ready to try it, they'll port it out to a disk or a file in any other method, and then try and run it on the TRS-80. Like when you did Breakout, Peter, was that mainly done on a PC or Mac, and then the final thing spat out to a Model 1 to road test?
All the software right now, I do it on my Mac, and I build it on my Mac, and I just transfer the file and I test it, because it's, like I said, more than 10 times more efficient.
Yeah.
It depends, but if you really want the vintage experience, the first application I developed, TrustWiki, I developed on a Model 1 using MRAS, and the assemble times took minutes, and it took me a long time. I got the flavor, I got the experience though, which was kind of neat too. So,
So you have a Model 1, just the keyboard, or do you have expansion interface for it, or what?
No, I just have Model 1 keyboard, level 2 16K, and then the cassette. Yeah.
Okay. One thing you can look at that Ian sells, it's called the Quinterface, and that gives you the extra memory, so you get 48K, and it does the auto boot off of a Fred, so you get a Quinterface and a Fred, and that'll give you a system that you can boot up, and it's more reliable than finding an old expansion interface and getting the disk drives. And then you can have the hard drive image and have your assembler there and do your assembler there as well.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and assembling with a hard drive is much faster. Even the disk drives were really slow at assembling, but having everything online at the speed of a hard drive does actually make assembling on a Model 1 or 3 or 4 acceptable.
Sure. It's funny. On my vacation, I just listened to, I think it was episode 11, where Peter, you mentioned that ZMAC and this whole issue of doing the assembly development offline. And so I just literally listened to that like yesterday. It's funny, but it probably a stupid question, but is that only for a Mac, or is there's a PC version as well for that tool?
George, you still on?
Yeah. ZMAC or ZMAC, as we call it here north of the border, it's written in C, and it's based on an assembler that goes back to like 1978. And so you can download that from my website, and it comes with a PC binary and can be compiled for Linux or Mac easily.
Okay. I apologize. I didn't realize that was you, George, that's from. Great.
Oh,
Great.
No, that's okay. And then TRS-80 GP is a native Windows application, but if you use Wine, it runs perfectly fine on a Mac or a Linux box as well. So.
Okay, good. Well, I'll look into all that. And it's funny, as you mentioned, Peter. Part of it is I want to specifically have that vintage experience and experience how these guys, develop these things back in the in the late 70s and such. At the same time, once I have that experience, I would like to certainly develop on my modern machine and be a little more efficient with my time. Don't want to always have that experience.
So develop a Hello World app on the Model 1.
There you go.
And then do the real programming on the modern.
There you go. Yep. So anyway,
If you haven't watched it, John, look up the talk by Arthur Gleckler from Tandy Assembly about designing a assembly language game back in the day. Before he was doing it on basically what you got, a Model 1 with a cassette recorder, and he actually his talk gives you a really good feel without actually turning the computer on of what's required to write things like that. And so if you haven't seen that, it's actually a really good talk. I'm sort of glad he came along to that thing.
Great. Yeah, I'll check that out.
Still amazes me that he was able to do that. Or not him. There were a lot of guys that did it back in the day with the cassette player developing it. Jeez. All right. So let's call it a show. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll be back next time with a pre-recorded, nicely edited and polished trash talk. I hope everyone had a good time.
Thanks, Pete.
Good night, everyone.
Pete, thanks for hosting that. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. It was great.
Good, George. Bye.